Hey everybody, this is Darren Van Dam and you are watching Flick Connection, the show that helps you get more out of movies, and today we're going to be talking about 10 hidden gem movies currently available on Hulu. So this is going to be a ranked list of 10 movies currently available on Hulu that are all hidden gems, meaning you probably haven't heard of them, at least not all of them. But we're going to start this list off all the way at the back at number 10 with a very little known movie that is going to be perfect for Curb Your Enthusiasm fans. This stars Jeff Garlin, it's called Dealing with Idiots, and it's kind of like watching an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm. There's a very similar sense of humor to this. In fact, you can tell that Jeff Garlin is essentially just taking the formula that he's learned after being on Curb Your Enthusiasm for so many years and just applying it to a nice, light-hearted movie. Garland has another similar one on Netflix called Handsome, where he plays a detective. Again, very similar to the Curb aesthetic, except it's a little bit different. It doesn't have that Larry David touch, which I know is what makes Curb so special, but there's enough funny about Dealing with Idiots that I think Curb fans are gonna absolutely love it. However, if that's not your brand of humor, don't worry, I've got plenty more to pick from on this list. However, my next pick has very few laughs in it. It is an indie horror flick called 12-Hour Shift. Now, this is actually written and directed by Bree Grant, who you probably recognize from a ton of stuff, including Dexter. She was in 1 or 2 seasons of that show as well, and I always like her and everything, but she's behind the camera here and did an excellent job. Now, this is an indie horror flick, and I will say the narrative gets a little bit lost. It's not as tight as I would have liked, which is why it's at number 9, but it's still a really wild ride. This also stars Angela Bettis, who is most famous for a movie called May, which is another hidden gem horror movie that I highly recommend. I just rarely see it on streaming services. She is excellent here. While some of the supporting cast is pretty good, she really carries this thing and makes it work. And without giving anything away, essentially you're following a nurse on a 12-hour shift, and she may or may not be up to no good. There's some really great scenes here for an indie horror movie. I'm very interested to see what Bree Grant does next, because I thought she did a lot of clever things with this movie. I mean, it is not quite tied together in a neat package the way that I would like, but I think that's something that's going to come along with experience. So again, very interested to see what she does next, and I had a really great time watching this movie, even though it was really grim and really bloody. Now, another bloody one that is really not that grim is called Spontaneous. This is a coming-of-age teen romance movie, except in the background, you've got this thing happening where people are just spontaneously exploding. And I don't mean they're like spontaneously combusting. They're literally just popping like a balloon, blood goes everywhere, it's pretty gross. The thing that I found interesting about Spontaneous is that, again, that is in the background. This is a coming-of-age teen romance, and it's done quite well, but all the people exploding and sort of the spontaneity of that it could happen at any time is a little more of a metaphor for what it's like to be a teenager. Your whole life is about to change. There's a lot of dread that comes with that. And the little gimmick here of people exploding actually served a pretty good purpose. It worked in the background as sort of adding this layer of tension to being a teenager. While it's not realistic, it was interesting and it made for a very different viewing experience than anything I've seen in quite a while. We've got a somewhat new release Western on the list, and a couple of recent videos I talked about how much I liked The Harder They Fall on Netflix, but I also explained that it is not a traditional Western. In fact, it feels much more like a stage play. If you were starved for an old-fashioned Western, I highly recommend checking out The Kid. This movie is loosely based on the true account of Billy the Kid's face-off with Sheriff Pat Garrett, played by Ethan Hawke. Vincent D'Onofrio also stars in this, and interestingly enough, he actually wrote and directed this movie. And I think he did do a good job. My only nitpick is something very similar to what I said about 12-Hour Shift. It's not quite as tight and neat as you would like, but if you can go ahead and get that out of your head, it is a good Western with some really great acting, including a great role from Chris Pratt where he's playing a villain. He's going very against type, and he did a good job. He's not in the movie that much, but I did enjoy seeing him do something very different to what I'm used to. So all in all, kind of a mediocre Western, but again, if you're starved for one, it's been a while since you've watched kind of a classic one, then The Kid is definitely gonna fit that bill. Now my next pick is one of the first movies I ever actually watched streaming on Netflix. It's an indie movie. Not many people know about it, even though it did kind of make the rounds during that time when there weren't many options on streaming services. However, it has been years since I've seen cash back available anywhere. This is a very low budget movie, but it is incredibly effective considering they didn't have that much money to spend. In this movie, a young man goes through a really traumatic breakup and develops insomnia. So his solution is to start working late nights at a grocery store. And during these sleepless nights in the grocery store, his imagination begins to run wild, he begins to act out some sexual fantasies, and the movie itself is kind of a sexy movie, but there's also a lot of really interesting relationship stuff going on as well. This is a slower paced indie movie, but if that's your bag, you like that kind of stuff, I highly recommend checking that out. However, if that is not typically the type of movie you watch, do not let me fool you with the clips I'm showing you here. Even though it looks like there's a lot of scantily clad women in this movie, that is not the reason to watch it. You're gonna be sorely disappointed. But if you are interested in the concept, I can tell you for a fact that cashback does deliver. Okay, before moving on to my top 5 on this list, I do want to tell you about today's sponsor. I know longtime subscribers are tired of hearing me talk about CyberGhost VPN, but the reason I feature them in so many videos is one, because they do pay me to do that, but it is a VPN service that I use, and the reason I use it is not just because it keeps my web browsing safe, secure, and private. I use it because it lets me access a ton of other movies and shows with my existing Netflix, Hulu, Prime Video, and other streaming service accounts. Now, most streaming services block the use of VPN so that you can't get around international licensing, but whatever device you stream movies on, whether it's a smart TV, an Apple TV, your computer, it's legally nobody's business where you are in the world, and you can easily just tell that device you're in France, Germany, Canada, and immediately access Netflix, Prime Video, Hulu, other streaming services in those countries, and they have vastly different offerings depending on where you are. And just as an example, look, I'll open up my CyberGhost. Let's just type in Netflix, and let's just pick Netflix Italy. Load that up. And here we are, we're watching Netflix in Italy, and they've got Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Baby Driver, American Psycho, Bad Boys for Life, 12 Strong, Dr. Sleep. I mean, stuff that is not on American Netflix, Joker, Interstellar, American Sniper, all this stuff. Look, and they're not in Italian or anything, they're all in English, and they're here in Italy. Look, Shazam, Jumanji, Welcome to the Jungle. I mean, stuff that is just not available on American Netflix. It's so cool, and right now, my viewers can pay as little as $2.19 a month. That's less than it would cost to rent one of those movies. You can access loads of them using your CyberGhost account immediately, and even if you're not very tech savvy, they have great 24/7 customer support, and beyond that, they have a 45-day money-back guarantee, so there's virtually no risk, and you will be able to use CyberGhost on up to 7 devices at the same time. Again, this is a no-brainer. Just go to the link in the description, pay as low as $2.19 a month to access way more movies and shows than you could ever possibly hope to watch. But speaking of movies and shows, let's move on with the top 5 picks on this list. My next pick is far and away the weirdest one on this list, but it's also far and away the weirdest one I've seen in quite a while, and longtime subscribers know I love weird movies, but Mandibles is actually from director Quentin Dupieux. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce his last name,
Dupieux.
But he is famous for extremely bizarre movies, including Rubber, Wrong, and his last movie, Deerskin, which is another one I recommended, but I recommend them with the caveat that these are really only for people who like really bizarre movies. In fact, I think this fits the definition of avant-garde. So if that is not for you, do not come back here and blame me for picking this one. I'm giving you enough of a warning as who this movie is for. However, this is French language, and a couple of bonehead, I don't even want to call them criminals, but a couple of goofball guys come into the possession of this gigantic housefly. I don't want to say chaos ensues. This movie actually has kind of a laid-back pace to it, but it has got some wild scenes in it, and the fly itself looks very convincing, which just works on a comedic level, and this is a funny movie if you allow it to be. Now, it's not quite as funny as it would have been had I been speaking the native language. When you watch a movie with subtitles, the jokes do land, but the inflection and everything is very stiff. You can't really tell what words they're emphasizing, and so things aren't quite as funny, but that said, this movie was so interesting to me that I was enthralled all the way through. Keep in mind, this one's weird. It doesn't make any sense. It's supposed to be that way. But for entertainment value, if you like more bizarre stuff, this one is going to be right up your alley. Now, for people who do like weird movies but think Mandibles is maybe a little bit too weird for them, I recommend checking out Stephen King's Thinner. This came out in 1996, and in this movie, an overweight man has a curse put on him by a gypsy, and he begins shedding weight fairly dramatically. This is actually directed by Tom Holland. No, not that Tom Holland. This Tom Holland, who is most famous for having directed Child's Play and Fright Night, so he's no stranger to the genre. And while Thinner does have a dated look, some of the makeup effects and things have not held up with time. They're not awful. You just have to keep in mind, this is a 1996 movie. If you generally like movies based on Stephen King books, this is one you should go for, but it will feel dated compared to a lot of the Stephen King movies coming out lately. That's just the way it was in the 90s, but if you like the concept, then this one does deliver as just a weird, fun, kind of midnight movie. My next pick is actually a really funny documentary. It's called Too Funny to Fail. This is actually the story of the Dana Carvey show. Now, most of you will know who Dana Carvey is. He was the church lady and a bunch of other great characters on Saturday Night Live, including Garth from Wayne's World, so just comedic legend. And actually, when he left SNL, he had a really high status in the comedy community, and he was given his own sketch comedy show, The Dana Carvey Show, which went down in glorious flames. And this documentary captures all of it. There's a ton of interviews with all the people who worked on the show, and it's a really amazing story as to how they literally thought they were all too funny to fail, and they did some horrendous stuff on primetime TV. I mean, light spoiler here, but the first episode came on after a really heavy episode of Home Improvement, and I remember as a kid watching it. I was way too young to be watching that type of content. It came on during primetime. It was wild stuff, and this documentary catches everything that happened then and just this amazing downfall. But the show itself has some incredibly funny moments. If you're like me and after watching this documentary you get the itch to watch the Dana Carvey Show episodes, you can actually catch them out for free on Crackle right now. Yeah, you'll have to put up with a couple ads, but trust me, if the documentary makes you want to see the actual sketches, they're wilder than you could imagine. My next pick is another comedy from several years ago, and then my number one pick is one of my favorite movies of 2021, but my number two pick is called In a World, and it's technically, I think, a romantic comedy. But the reason it gets such a strong recommendation from me is it doesn't follow any of the typical beats of a rom-com. This was actually written and directed by and stars Lake Bell, who is not only beautiful, but she's really funny and incredibly talented. This movie's so well written and really well directed, whereas I said some of the other ones that I enjoyed were a little loose. This is a very tight movie, and it's a crowd pleaser. I've showed this to groups of people that have absolutely enjoyed it. In this movie, she plays a voice actor who's trying to build her career and become quite famous in that community. Her father was this really famous one, and he's managing to sort of hold her down and some other people, but you've got a lot of really great comedy actors in this, including obviously Lake Bell, but also Demetri Martin has a great role, Rob Corddry, Nick Offerman, Tig Notaro, Ken Marino. I mean, just really funny people, and the movie's just so well written and just has a great charm and sensibility to it. This would make a great date night movie, or if you're needing to pick something out in mixed company, this would be a fantastic one to keep in your back pocket. And then finally, we will end this list with my number one pick, one of my favorite movies of 2021, even if it didn't quite make it into my top 5. If you want to check out that video, I'll put a link in the description. But Pig, starring Nicolas Cage, is an exceptional film on many, many levels. I will say this is a slow-paced Nicolas Cage movie. Do not go into this expecting typical Nicolas Cage, which is exactly what makes this movie work so well. They cast Nicolas Cage for a reason. One, he's able to do a lot of the subtlety and the really strong acting, and I don't mean the typical Nicolas Cage stuff. I mean just good, strong performance stuff. He's able to do that stuff, he just chooses not to most of the time, And what you get with Pig is something very different from what you're going to expect. In the movie, the filmmakers rather, do a great job of setting up some expectations you might have from watching years of Nicolas Cage movies and then immediately subverting them. And that is not a spoiler, by the way. I had the same thing explained to me by another reviewer before I watched this, and with every single scene in Pig, I did not know what was going to happen next, which is special. Now, that may be something you experience a lot, but for me, this is my career. I watch an ungodly amount of movies, and so I'm able to see things coming. They get telegraphed just because I understand the language of movies from having watched so many of them, and Pig was speaking a different language, and I loved it for that. But that is the list. If you've seen anything else of interest lately that you'd like to let us know about, let us know in the comments down below. You might see one of your recommendations here on a future video. If you'd like to see your name on future videos, you could become a Patreon supporter like one of these fine folks. There's a link in the video description below if you want to do that. There's also a link down there where you can become a channel member and get access to exclusive videos right here on YouTube. But I will keep making these reviews as long as you keep watching them. Thanks for checking out this Hulu list, and you will see me on the next one.